2:07 a.m. I received a screenshot. She's just my boss. Don't misunderstand. Typed by my husband's female boss on his phone. 2:29 a.m. They stood at my doorstep in Aurora, Colorado, him trembling, her smiling like she'd just won a trophy. 2:31 a.m. I opened the door and flipped on the porch lights because my revenge was exactly what they thought they'd been hiding. My name is Harper Lane, and I've spent 14 years designing spaces where people feel safe. Interior architect by trade, creator of sanctuaries by calling. But at 2:07 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, my own sanctuary cracked like poorly mixed concrete. The phone's vibration against our mahogany nightstand wasn't unusual. Daniel often got alerts from Howlcrest Strategies at ungodly hours. What was unusual was the photo notification lighting up the screen, a message from his phone, but not typed by him. He's with me. Don't wait up. V. Below the text, a photo, 2 wine glasses on a marble bar counter, a Summit Ridge resort room key with 412 visible, and in the reflection of the wine bottle, Victoria Sterling's manicured hand on my husband's shoulder. I didn't reach for the phone immediately. Instead, I lay there in our king-sized bed, counting the rotations of our ceiling fan. 7, 8, 9. My mind shifted into the same mode I use when examining structural damage in old Denver brownstones: assess, document, plan. The second message arrived at 2:09. She's just my boss. Don't misunderstand. This one was different, fumbling, desperate. Clearly Daniel wrestling his phone back. The caps lock screamed guilt louder than any confession could. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the reclaimed hardwood floors we'd installed last spring. In the blue light of his phone screen, I studied the messages like blueprints. The timestamp gaps told their own story, 2 minutes between her bold declaration and his panicked correction. 2 minutes of what? An argument, a struggle for the phone, or just the time it took him to realize she'd actually sent it? My laptop sat in my home office down the hall, but I didn't need it yet. I simply took my own phone and captured everything's screenshots, timestamps, the metadata I knew would matter later. As an architect, I'd learned that documentation was everything. You measure twice, cut once, you photograph every phase of demolition. I typed 7 words in response. Keep him, we're done here anyway. Then I switched his phone to silent and placed it back on the nightstand, screen down. The house felt different now, not like home, but like a project site. I walked to the kitchen, past the custom shelving I'd designed to display our wedding china, past the gallery wall of our travels to Telluride, Steamboat, Vail. My fingers found the light switch for the under-cabinet LEDs, and suddenly our granite countertops looked cold as morgue slabs. I made coffee, not because I wanted it, but because I needed the ritual. Grind the beans, measure the water, wait for the drip. Normal actions while my marriage dissolved like sugar in hot water. At 2:22, headlights swept across our living room wall. The geometric pattern of light through our decorative window screens, another one of my designs, danced briefly before disappearing. A car door slammed. Then another. Voices carried in the thin November air, his low and slurred, hers sharp and confident. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to their approach up our flagstone path. Daniel's keycard beeped 3 times against our smart lock before he remembered we'd switched to the backup key after last month's software glitch. The metallic scrape of his fumbling lasted 43 seconds. I counted each one. At 2:29 a.m. They stood in my doorway, Daniel with his tie loosened and shirt untucked. Victoria Sterling looking exactly like her LinkedIn photo, but with the satisfied expression of a cat who'd cornered a mouse. Her burgundy dress was wrinkled only at the hip, where she'd been sitting or lying too long in one position. Harper. Daniel started, his voice thick. It's not what don't, I said, flipping on the porch light. The 3,000 lumen flood I'd insisted on installing last year lit them up like actors on a stage. Just don't. The porch light caught every detail: the smear of Victoria's lipstick, the wine stain on Daniel's collar, the way they stood just far enough apart to pretend they hadn't been pressed together minutes ago. I stepped aside, gesturing them in with the same professional smile I used for difficult clients. Victoria, would you join me in the living room? I kept my voice neutral, architectural. Daniel, go upstairs, now. He opened his mouth to protest, but something in my expression must have warned him off. I'd seen that same look on contractors who'd tried to pass off substandard work the moment they realized I'd already documented every violation. Harper, please, we should… Upstairs. I didn't raise my voice. In 14 years of marriage, I'd never had to. The guest room. Your things are already in there. That was a lie, but he didn't know it. He trudged up our floating staircase, each step creaking its familiar protest. I waited until I heard the guest room door close before turning to Victoria. She'd already made herself comfortable on our leather sectional, crossing her legs like she owned the place. 41 years old according to her company bio, VP of operations for 3 years, and wearing a wedding ring that caught the light when she reached for her phone. Coffee, I offered, moving to the kitchen's open counter. I just made a fresh pot. I don't think. It wasn't really a question. I poured 2 mugs, adding nothing to either. You'll want to be alert for this conversation. While the coffee cooled between us, I activated the small camera I kept in my design kit usually used for documenting project progress, now repurposed for something else entirely. I positioned it on the bookshelf between 2 architecture awards, its lens capturing the entire seating area. So, I settled into the chair across from her, my back to the windows. How many men would you say have been not what you think? Her smile flickered for exactly half a second, a micro-expression I'd learned to read while negotiating with contractors. She recovered quickly, taking a sip of coffee she didn't want. I don't know what you mean. Sure you do. I pulled out my phone, swiping to a folder I'd labeled Foundation Issues. See, Victoria, I'm an architect. I notice patterns, structural weaknesses, repeated stress points that lead to collapse. Her eyes tracked my movements as I set the phone on the coffee table between us, screen still dark. For instance, I continued, there's a pattern in how you schedule one-on-ones with married male direct reports. Always late afternoon, often extending past 7. There's a pattern in how those meetings migrate from conference rooms to hotel bars. There's a pattern in how you position yourself as a mentor, a career advocate, someone they desperately need to impress. You're upset, she said, setting down her mug with deliberate care. That's understandable, but Daniel and I were simply working late at Summit Ridge in room 412, the same suite you've booked 6 times in the past 3 months, always coinciding with someone's critical project deadline. This time her smile didn't just flicker, it died entirely. That's an interesting accusation. It's not an accusation, it's data. I leaned back, studying her the way I'd study a load-bearing wall showing signs of stress. Here's what I'm curious about. Victoria, when you destroyed Matthew Benton's marriage 2 years ago at your previous company, did his wife also get a 2 text? Or was that a new touch you've added to your repertoire? The color drained from her face. How did you… Like I said, I notice patterns, and I document everything. I picked up my phone, finally lighting the screen. The question now is whether you want this pattern to continue, or whether you'd prefer to explore alternative structural solutions. She stood abruptly, her confidence cracking like bad foundation. I should go. Sit down. This time I did raise my voice, just enough to echo off the vaulted ceiling I'd designed to make the space feel larger. We're not done discussing your options. Above us, a floorboard creaked. Daniel, no doubt pressing his ear to the guest room floor. I smiled a real smile this time, knowing exactly which board he was standing on. I'd designed that floor. I knew every weak spot, every place where sound carried. Victoria slowly lowered herself back to the couch, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her phone. What do you want? The better question, I said, taking a long sip of my coffee, is what I already have. 6 weeks earlier, the first crack appeared in our foundation. Daniel had come home from a client dinner at Marcello's, or so he'd said, smelling of a perfume I didn't recognize, not floral like mine, but something spicier, muskier, Tom Ford, maybe, the kind of scent that announced itself before its wearer entered a room. "How was dinner?" I'd asked, folding laundry in our bedroom. "Good." Richardson loved the quarterly projections. Except Richardson had posted on LinkedIn that night from a conference in Dallas. I'd seen it while waiting for Daniel to come home, scrolling through my phone in bed. A small lie, but lies are like foundation cracks, they only grow wider. The next morning, I'd checked our credit card statement. Marcello's was there, but the charge was for $240. Their prix-fixe menu was $80 per person. With wine and tip, 2 people might hit $200. $240 meant cocktails first, maybe dessert wine after. It meant lingering. That's when I'd called Nolan Price. I'd found him through a commercial project he'd done background checks on a contractor who'd seemed too good to be true. Nolan had spent 15 years as an internal investigator for a Fortune 500 before going private. He looked like an accountant, talked like a lawyer, and thought like an engineer. "I need information," I'd told him over coffee at a cafe in Cherry Creek. "But everything has to be above board. No hacking, no illegal surveillance. Only what's publicly available or voluntarily provided." "Most people don't realize how much that is," he'd replied, sliding a contract across the table. "Social media, public records, metadata from photos, witness statements. You'd be amazed what people voluntarily broadcast." The first report came 3 days later. Victoria Sterling had a pattern. All right. Like a termite infestation that moves from house to house, leaving structural damage that only shows up years later. At her previous company, Meridian Associates, there had been 3 complaints filed with HR, all sealed under NDAs, but Nolan had found 2 of the wives through divorce records. Both were willing to talk off the record. The stories were nearly identical late meetings that became drinks, professional admiration that became emotional dependency. Then hotel rooms booked for conferences that only required 1 attendee. "She picks men at inflection points," Nolan had explained, showing me his analysis. "New fathers, men facing 40, anyone whose marriage is under normal stress. She positions herself as the one who truly understands their professional ambitions." The photos started coming in week 2. Daniel and Victoria leaving Marcello's at 10:37 p.m., her hand on his elbow. The 2 of them at a Starbucks near the office at 7 a.m., an hour before Daniel usually arrived at work. Victoria's car in the Hellecrest parking garage until 11 p.m. On nights, Daniel claimed to be in late meetings. But the smoking gun came in week 3. Summit Ridge Resort had terrible digital security. Their booking system showed Victoria had reserved the same suite the Canyon View King 6 times in 3 months. Always for 1 night, always checking in after 8 p.m. The dates matched perfectly with Daniel's client entertainment expenses. "There's more," Nolan had said during our final meeting. "She did this at her company before Meridian, too. Same pattern, same type of targets." One of the ex-husbands, Marcus Webb, documented everything. He's got recordings, emails, the works. He's been waiting 3 years for someone to ask. I'd taken the USB drive full of evidence and locked it in my office safe, the one hidden behind a false panel I'd designed myself. Information is like good architecture. It's not about what you build, but when and how you reveal it. The final piece fell into place 4 days ago. Daniel had left his laptop open while he showered, and a calendar reminder popped up, V Summit Ridge, 8 p.m., bring the Morrison files. There were no Morrison files. I'd checked. That night, I'd stood in my office, looking at the wall where I displayed my favorite projects. Each one had started with a problem, an unusable space, an impossible client demand, a site everyone said couldn't be developed. But with the right approach, the right timing, even the worst foundation could be excavated and rebuilt. I'd opened my laptop and started a new folder, Renovation Project Complete Demolition Required. Inside, I began organizing everything Nolan had found, plus what I'd discovered myself. Email timestamps showing Daniel's lies about his whereabouts, credit card charges that didn't match his stories, and most damning a photo from Victoria's Instagram, allegedly from a team dinner last month. In the background reflection of a wine glass, you could see only 2 place settings. The geotag placed it at Summit Ridge. By the time I heard Daniel's car in the garage that night, I'd already mapped out the entire demolition plan. In architecture, we call it controlled collapse, ensuring the structure falls exactly where you want it without damaging anything you want to preserve. 2:41 a.m. The living room had become a negotiation table, lit by the Edison bulbs I'd installed last summer. Their warm glow made everything look softer than it was the leather furniture, the exposed brick wall, even Victoria's increasingly rigid posture. The refrigerator hummed its familiar midnight song from the kitchen, the ice maker dropping cubes with its rhythmic clatter. These sounds of home continued their automated schedule, indifferent to the marriage dissolving in their midst. I opened the folder on my phone, tilting the screen so Victoria could see the first page of what I'd compiled, a summary sheet, bullet-pointed and clinical as a medical report. "Let me tell you what I have," I said, scrolling slowly. "Matthew Benton, Meridian Associates, 2022. You were his skip-level supervisor. His wife Emily has a sworn statement about finding hotel charges on their joint card. She's ready to testify if needed." Victoria's fingers tightened on her coffee mug. "Marcus Webb, same company, 2021. You mentored him through his promotion to senior director. His divorce filing specifically names you, though it was sealed. He kept recordings of your phone calls, 37 of them. He's been waiting for someone to ask for copies." "You're bluffing." I played a voice note Nolan had forwarded, just 5 seconds of Victoria's voice, clearly recognizable, saying, "Your wife doesn't understand your potential like I do." Marcus Webb's voice responded, "I know, but," before I stopped it. "Then there's Jeffrey Price from your previous company, Patricia Henley from the one before that. Should I continue?" The house creaked around us, the natural settling of wood and stone that I'd learned to distinguish from footsteps when Daniel worked late. Real late, not Victoria late. Above us, another floorboard protested. Daniel had moved to the landing, probably crouched by the banister like a child eavesdropping on his parents. "What you're doing could be considered extortion," Victoria said, but her voice had lost its corporate conference room authority. "Actually, it's not." I pulled up another document. "This is a draft complaint to Hallicrest's board of directors regarding systematic harassment and abuse of power. Every claim is documented. Every pattern is supported by evidence. The only question is whether I file it at 9 a.m. when the office opens, or whether we reach a different resolution." I stood, moving to the bookshelf where my camera was still recording. The small red light blinked steadily, capturing everything. "You have 2 options," I continued, running my finger along the spine of an architecture book Daniel had given me for our 10th anniversary. "Option 1. You resign from Hallicrest immediately. Clean break, effective today. You'll cite personal reasons. No farewell tour, no transition period, just gone." "That's ridiculous." "I have projects." "Option 2, I interrupted, turning to face her. "This complaint goes to your CEO, Mark Fitzgerald. I believe you report directly to him. It also goes to the board, with copies to 3 women on the executive team who I'm certain would find this pattern concerning. I'll include the statements from Emily Benton and Marcus Webb, the documentation from Nolan Price's investigation, and tonight's recording of you in my home at 2:41 a.m. after sending that helpful text from my husband's phone." The refrigerator's compressor kicked off, leaving us in sudden silence. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. "Oh," I added, as if just remembering. "The Denver Business Journal has been doing that series on workplace misconduct in the post-Me Too era. I'm sure they'd find this pattern fascinating. A female executive using her position to target married men, leaving a trail of destroyed families across 3 companies. The optics alone would be, stop," Victoria set down her mug with enough force to splash coffee onto my glass table. What guarantee do I have that you won't release this anyway? None, I admitted. But consider the alternative. If you resign quietly, this stays quiet. You can spin whatever narrative you want. Find another job in another city where they don't check references too carefully. Phoenix, maybe. Or Dallas, far from here. I pulled up one final document, a resignation letter I'd drafted on Hellcrest letterhead I'd downloaded from their website. I took the liberty of writing it for you. Clean, professional, vague enough to avoid questions. All it needs is your digital signature. Above us, Daniel's weight shifted. The third stair from the top groaned the one I'd been meaning to fix for months. I knew exactly where he stood, probably gripping the banister I'd selected from a reclaimed lumber yard in Boulder. Victoria looked from the phone to me to the camera still blinking on the bookshelf. You recorded this? Without my consent. Colorado is a one-party consent state, I replied. I consent. That's all that's legally required. But you know that, don't you? It's probably why you were so careful to never leave voicemails. Only texts. Texts from other people's phones. Her facade finally cracked completely, the polished VP veneer splitting like cheap laminate. The next morning arrived gray and bitter, November asserting itself through frost on the windows. Victoria had left at 3:17 a.m., her heels clicking defeat across my porch. Daniel had waited exactly 4 minutes before creeping downstairs, finding me still in the living room, organizing my documentation into neat folders. Harper, please, let me explain. I'd looked at him, really looked, stubble coming in gray at the temples, the beginning of jowls I hadn't noticed before, that desperate eagerness in his eyes that probably made Victoria feel powerful. She manipulated me, he started, sinking into the spot Victoria had vacated. The leather still held her warmth. You don't understand the pressure at work, the way she made it seem like my career depended on. Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop. You're 36 years old, not some intern. You made choices. I made a mistake. One mistake. 6 times at Summit Ridge is not one mistake. It's a pattern. His face drained. He hadn't known I knew about all of them. I want to fix this, he pleaded, reaching for my hand. I pulled back, standing. We can go to counseling. I'll transfer departments. Hell, I'll quit if you want. You should worry more about keeping your job than saving this marriage. I'd left him there and gone to my office, locking the door behind me. I had emails to send, lawyers to contact, movers to schedule. The business of dismantling 14 years required spreadsheets. But first, I needed to check something. Daniel's home computer synced with his work laptop, a security risk I'd warned him about months ago. His email was right there, password saved. I wasn't looking for evidence anymore. I had plenty. I was looking for understanding. The folder labeled personal should have been my first red flag. Men who need to label things personal are usually hiding something. Inside, buried 3 folders deep. I found it. An email draft dated yesterday. Saved, but not sent. To Victoria. V. Harper knows about the PI. Saw him outside Marcello's last week. The same guy who was asking questions at the office. We need to be more careful. Maybe we should cool things until after the holidays. I'll handle her if she confronts me. But watch what you put in writing. Delete this after reading. D. I read it twice, then photographed it with my phone before taking a screenshot for good measure. He'd known about Nolan for a week. He'd been preparing his lies, coaching her on theirs. I'll handle her. Like I was a project risk to be managed, I forwarded the draft to myself, to Nolan, and to the lawyer I'd contacted 3 weeks ago when the pattern first became clear. Subject line, priority admission of conspiracy. Then I opened Daniel's sent folder. 63 emails to Victoria in the past month. I scanned subject lines, thoughts on your proposal. Ree Morrison timeline. Quick sync before tomorrow. All of them sent after hours. All of them with that professional veneer barely covering the subtext. One caught my eye. Sent 2 weeks ago at 11:43 p.m. You were right about needing to think bigger. Harper's always been about playing it safe. But you understand ambition. Playing it safe. Is that what he thought designing award-winning spaces was? Playing it safe. While he pushed numbers around spreadsheets and called it strategy, I printed everything. The printer in my office hummed efficiently, pages stacking like evidence at a crime scene. When it finished, I had 47 pages of proof that my husband had been planning his affair like a business merger. A knock at my office door interrupted my organizing. Harper. Daniel's voice, tentative. There's someone from Victoria's office on the phone. They say it's urgent. I unlocked the door to find him holding his cell phone like it might explode. His face had the puffy, shocked look of someone who'd been crying or drinking. Probably both. Hello? I took the phone. Mrs. Reed. This is Sandra from HR at Halecrest. I'm calling to inform you that there's been an ethics complaint filed that may involve your husband. We'll need him to come in for a meeting Monday morning at 9 a.m. I kept my face neutral while Daniel watched. I see. Can you share what this is regarding? I'm not at liberty to discuss details, but it involves potential policy violations regarding relationships between supervisors and reports. Will you ensure Mr. Reed receives this message? Absolutely. Thank you for calling. I hung up and handed the phone back to Daniel. His hand shook as he took it. What did they want? There's been an ethics complaint. You're needed Monday at 9. His legs seemed to give out. He slumped against the doorframe. She wouldn't. Victoria wouldn't file a complaint against me. I almost laughed. Even now, he thought she'd protect him. No. I agreed, gathering my printed pages into a folder. She wouldn't. The realization dawned slowly across his face as he understood who would. The weekend passed in calculated preparation. While Daniel alternated between bargaining and drinking himself into silence, I built my case with architectural precision. Saturday morning, I submitted the whistleblower complaint through Halecrest's anonymous ethics hotline, a system I'd researched extensively. They guaranteed reporter protection and required investigation within 72 hours for executive-level complaints. I included just enough evidence to trigger a full review the Summit Ridge bookings, the pattern of after-hours meetings, and 3 photographs with metadata intact. I didn't mention my name, but I made sure to note that multiple employees have observed concerning behavior, and at least one spouse has documented evidence. Let their legal team sweat over what else might be coming. By Saturday afternoon, Nolan had secured written statements from Emily Benton and Marcus Webb's ex-wife. Both women had been waiting years for someone to ask. Emily's was particularly damning. She'd kept a journal documenting her husband's personality changes, the late nights, the way he'd started criticizing her appearance after Victoria began mentoring him. She picks them when they're vulnerable, Emily had written. Then makes them feel like kings while treating their wives like obstacles to overcome. Sunday, I reached out to a journalist friend, Rebecca Torres, who covered corporate governance for the Denver Business Journal. We'd met years ago when she'd written about women in architecture. I didn't give her the story not yet, but I planted seeds. Hypothetically, I'd said over coffee in Lodo, if someone had evidence of a female executive systematically targeting married male subordinates across multiple companies, would that be newsworthy? Rebecca's eyes had lit up like she'd won the lottery. Hypothetically, that would be huge. The reverse gender dynamic alone would generate national pickup. When can we talk non-hypothetically? Maybe Monday afternoon, depending on how a certain meeting goes. The masterstroke came Sunday evening. I created a presentation clean, professional, the kind I'd pitch to clients. 20 slides documenting Victoria's pattern across 3 companies, 5 years, and 7 confirmed affairs. I included timelines, organizational charts showing reporting structures, and a heat map of hotel bookings correlating with mentorship meetings. Then I scheduled it to auto-send to 5 carefully selected recipients at 9:10 a.m. Monday, Mark Fitzgerald, CEO, Jennifer Walsh, Chief Legal Counsel, Patricia Keung, Head of HR, and 2 female board members whose bios emphasized their commitment to ethical leadership. The email's subject line read, "Urgent pattern of executive misconduct requiring immediate action, time-sensitive documentation attached." But the real trap was simpler. I'd learned Victoria had a standing staff meeting every Monday at 8:30 a.m. She'd be presenting the quarterly operations review to her team 12 direct reports, including Daniel. It was too important to miss, even if she'd wanted to call in sick. Sunday night at 11:47 p.m., Victoria sent me an email from her personal account. "We should talk woman to woman." I smiled at my laptop screen. Woman to woman, as if we were sisters in some struggle, not architect and termite. I replied with 2 sentences. "Nothing left to discuss. See you at the office tomorrow." Then I sent one more email, this one to Hallicrest's HR department, from my real account this time. "Dear Ms. Kung, I am writing to inform you that I will be attending tomorrow's 9 a.m. ethics review meeting as a relevant party. I will be bringing documentation regarding Executive VP Victoria Sterling's inappropriate relationship with my husband, Daniel Reed, as well as evidence of a broader pattern of misconduct. I've attached a preliminary summary for your review. The full documentation will be available at tomorrow's meeting. I look forward to discussing how Hallicrest plans to address this systemic issue. Regards, Harper Lane, AIA, Lead, AP." The preliminary summary was just 1 page, but it included the key phrase, "pattern of behavior involving multiple companies and documented victims willing to testify." I knew it would trigger an emergency legal review before morning. By midnight, I'd laid out my clothes for Monday like armor my best suit, the one I wore to win difficult clients. My leather portfolio with brass corners, a gift from my mentor when I'd earned my architecture license. Inside, 43 pages of evidence, tabbed and indexed. Daniel found me in the kitchen at 1 a.m., organizing my documents at the granite island. "What are you doing?" "Preparing for tomorrow." "Harper, please, don't do this. You're going to destroy my career." I looked up from my papers, really seeing him for perhaps the last time as my husband rather than a stranger who happened to live in my house. "No, Daniel, you and Victoria already did that. I'm just documenting the demolition." He stood there in his boxers and undershirt, looking lost in the home I'd designed for us. The pendant lights I'd selected cast shadows under his eyes, making him look older, defeated. "She said she'd resign," he offered weakly. "If that's what you wanted." "Oh, she'll resign, but not because I wanted it, because it will be her only option to avoid prosecution." The word hung between us. Prosecution. It was the first time I'd said it out loud, but I'd been thinking it since I'd found the email about him warning Victoria about the PI, conspiracy, fraud, if any of those client dinners had been expensed, sexual harassment, given the power dynamics. "Go to bed, Daniel. You'll want to look rested tomorrow. First impressions matter when you're fighting for your job." Monday, 9 a.m. The Hallicrest conference room smelled like fresh coffee and fear. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Denver, the mountains distant and indifferent. The fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that made everyone look slightly ill, or maybe that was just the circumstances. Mark Fitzgerald sat at the head of the polished table, his CEO smile nowhere in evidence. To his right, Jennifer Walsh, chief legal counsel, typed notes on her laptop with the focused intensity of someone documenting a disaster. Patricia Kung from HR flanked his left, a stack of folders in front of her that I recognized my submission had been thoroughly reviewed. Victoria sat across from me, still in her 8:30 staff meeting outfit, a cream blazer that probably cost more than most people's rent. Daniel sat 2 chairs away from her, the distance carefully calculated to suggest professionalism. Too bad about the matching hickeys barely concealed by their respective collars. "Thank you all for attending this emergency review," Mark began, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd been awakened at 5 a.m. by legal counsel. We received multiple complaints over the weekend regarding potential violations of our workplace conduct policy. At exactly 9:10 a.m., I saw Jennifer Walsh's laptop ping, then Patricia's. Then Mark's phone buzzed. My scheduled email had arrived. Jennifer opened the attachment first. I watched her eyes widen as she scanned the heat map of hotel bookings. "Mr. Fitzgerald," she interrupted, "you need to see this immediately." While they huddled over her screen, I placed my leather portfolio on the table and extracted my documentation, laying out each section like blueprints for review. "Perhaps," I said, my voice cutting through their murmuring, I could help clarify the situation. All eyes turned to me. "My name is Harper Lane. Daniel Reed is my husband, or was until Thursday night when Ms. Sterling sent a text from his phone informing me that he was with her at Summit Ridge Resort. That was the 6th time she'd booked the same suite in 3 months. Victoria started to speak, but Jennifer raised a hand to silence her. I continued, sliding the first document across the table. "This is a timeline of Ms. Sterling's tenure at 3 companies over 5 years. The highlighted names are men who reported to her, all married, all of whom ended up divorced within 18 months of her mentorship." Patricia picked up the document, scanning it with professional interest. "These are serious allegations, Mrs. Lane." "They're not allegations. They're documented facts." I slid over the next set. Written statements from Emily Benton and Christine Webb, whose husbands were previous targets, both willing to testify, both with contemporaneous documentation. Mark's face had gone from concerned to furious. He turned to Victoria. "Is any of this true?" "It's not what it looks like," Victoria said. The same words that had started this whole unraveling. Jennifer Walsh actually laughed a short, sharp sound like breaking glass. "Ms. Sterling, I'm looking at a photograph of you and Mr. Reed entering a hotel room at 8:47 p.m. on November 15th. The metadata is intact. The corporate credit card receipt shows you expensed it as a client meeting. Which client was in that room?" Silence. "Which client?" "Ms. Sterling." "I don't recall the specific Morrison Industries," I suggested helpfully. "That's what Daniel's calendar said. Funny thing, though Morrison Industries doesn't exist." I checked. Daniel's face went white. He hadn't known I'd dug that deep. Patricia's phone rang. She answered, listened. Then her expression shifted to something between panic and damage control. "Mr. Fitzgerald, we have another situation. Tom Marshall from sales just filed a complaint. He says Ms. Sterling propositioned him at the Q3 review dinner, and when he declined, she threatened his commission structure." The room erupted. Jennifer Walsh immediately started recording on her phone for legal documentation. Mark Fitzgerald stood, his composure finally cracking. "Victoria, you're suspended immediately pending investigation. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. Mr. Reed, you're also suspended pending review of your involvement." My involvement, Daniel finally found his voice. "I was manipulated." I pulled out my final document. Actually, about that manipulation claim. I slid the printed email across to Jennifer. "This is a draft email from Daniel's account, warning Ms. Sterling about my private investigator and coaching her on how to handle me if I found out. Quote, I'll handle her, unquote." Jennifer read it, then passed it to Mark, who passed it to Patricia. The chain of evidence, properly documented. "This appears to show conspiracy," Jennifer said slowly. "Premeditation. This changes things from a conduct violation to potential fraud. Given the expensed meetings." Victoria stood abruptly. "I need to speak with my attorney." "Sit down," Mark commanded, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Patricia, call building security. No one leaves this room until we've documented everything." The fluorescent lights continued their relentless hum. Outside, Denver went about its Monday morning, indifferent to the careers imploding on the 32nd floor. The conference room had become a courtroom, and I was both prosecutor and star witness. I reached into my portfolio one final time, pulling out the small digital recorder I'd been carrying since 2:41 a.m. Friday morning. "Before we proceed," I said, placing it on the table, "you should know I have a recording of Ms. Sterling in my home, discussing her pattern of behavior, Colorado is a one-party consent state. Jennifer Walsh's fingers flew across her laptop, presumably verifying the legal statute. She nodded to Mark. I pressed play. Victoria's voice filled the room, tinny but clear through the small speaker. These relationships are complicated. Sometimes mentoring requires a more personal touch. The wives never understand the pressure their husbands are under. My voice responded. How many wives haven't understood? Victoria. That's not relevant. I stopped the recording. There's 43 minutes more. Would you like to hear the part where she admits to targeting married men specifically because they're, quote, more motivated to keep things discreet? Victoria's cream blazer now looked like armor that had failed. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, then thought better of it. I want to make something clear, Mark Fitzgerald said, standing to his full 6'3" height. This behavior is not just a violation of our policies. It's a betrayal of every woman who's fought for legitimate advancement in corporate America. You've weaponized mentorship, Ms. Sterling. He turned to Daniel. And you, Mr. Reed, betrayed not just your wife but your fiduciary duty to this company by filing false expense reports. Those client dinners constitute fraud. Patricia Keung spread out several papers. Ms. Sterling, I have here a resignation letter, effective immediately. Sign it, and we'll consider this an internal matter. Refuse, and we'll be obligated to involve law enforcement regarding the fraudulent expenses. Victoria's face cycled through emotions, rage, fear, calculation. She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw what Daniel must have seen a woman who'd confused power with predation. This is extortion, she said weakly. No, Jennifer Walsh corrected. This is consequence. The resignation letter made its way across the table. Victoria signed with a Mont Blanc pen that Daniel had probably complimented once. Her signature was smaller than usual, cramped. Mr. Reed, Patricia turned to my husband, your situation will require further review. You're suspended without pay pending investigation. We'll need your company laptop, phone, and access badges immediately. Daniel looked at me, his eyes pleading for something mercy, forgiveness, understanding. I gave him nothing. I'd already given him 14 years. Security arrived 2 guards in navy blazers who'd probably dealt with worse but rarely with more documentation. Victoria stood, her heels clicking one last time on the conference room's marble floor. She stopped at the door, turning back to me. You've ruined everything. No, I replied, gathering my documents back into my portfolio. I've simply documented what was already broken. As security escorted them out, Victoria to clean out her office, Daniel to surrender his devices, I remained seated. The morning sun had climbed higher, cutting through the conference room windows in sharp angles. Mark Fitzgerald cleared his throat. Mrs. Lane, I apologize on behalf of Halecrest for what you've endured. If there's anything we can do— Actually, there is. I pulled out one last document. This is a proposal for a company-wide redesign of your mentorship program. I'm an architect. I specialize in fixing structural problems. Your corporate culture has some cracks in the foundation. Jennifer Walsh leaned forward, interested despite the morning's chaos. I'm also filing for divorce, I continued, placing the papers on the table where my marriage had officially ended. Daniel will need to find new housing immediately. I designed our home, chose every board and brick. He can keep his suits and his shame. Everything else is mine. Patricia made a note. We'll ensure he understands he's not to contact you except through attorneys. I stood, collecting my portfolio, feeling lighter than I had in months. The conference room's fluorescent lights no longer seemed oppressive. They were just lights, illuminating truth. As I reached the door, Mark Fitzgerald called out, Mrs. Lane, the way you handled the documentation, the systematic approach, have you ever considered corporate consulting? We could use someone with your skills in our compliance department. I turned back, allowing myself a small smile. I build beautiful spaces, Mr. Fitzgerald, but sometimes you have to demolish first. I walked through Halecrest's lobby one last time, past the modern art and marble facades that suggested permanence and stability. but I knew better now. Everything could be renovated, rebuilt, redesigned, even a life. Outside, Denver's November air bit sharp and clean. My phone buzzed with texts from my sister Brooke, from Rebecca Torres at the Business Journal, from 3 attorney friends who'd somehow already heard. The story would spread like structural damage, invisible at first, then impossible to ignore, but I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. First, I had blueprints to draw for my new life, measured twice, cut once, built to last. As I walked to my car, I said the words out loud to the cold morning air, tasting their truth. It's exactly what it looks like. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm curious, where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Sometimes the best revenge really is just showing everyone exactly what they've been trying to hide.